Hello and welcome. My name is Gene. I'm the Dean of the Whitman School of Management. And I'd like to extend an especially warm welcome to the students who are joining us tonight. And I also want to welcome the many alumni who have joined the call. Thank you for setting aside some time to be here with us. And thanks for all the ways in which you support Whitman and SU. Business and society face pressing and unprecedented challenges, and we can't afford to leave any talent on the sidelines. So Whitman has made it a priority to recruit and support a diverse community of students, staff, faculty, and advisory board members. We've made some important progress when it comes to gender diversity. The percentage of women joining the undergraduate program has increased from 36% in 2017 to 47% last year, and applications from women for next year's class are running even higher. Representation is just the ante, of course. The school is working to provide a more supportive environment and appropriate professional development opportunities for all of our students, and to do so in a way that recognizes everyone's needs are not the same. In particular, women, minorities, international, and LGBTQ+ graduates face unique challenges when it comes to navigating the workplace, finding allies and mentors, building professional networks, making work-life trade-offs, and addressing inequities that they encounter or see along the way. One important way that Whitman can help is by convening events like this one, bringing together women that have achieved and are achieving great success in their respective fields. I'm very grateful to each of them for so graciously agreeing to be here with us this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Lisa Fontenelli, who will introduce our other three panelists. Lisa graduated from Syracuse in 1986 with a dual degree from Whitman and Newhouse. She spent most of her professional life at Goldman Sachs, where she rose to become head of securities research and deputy head of global investment of the Global Investment Research Division. She was named partner in 2006 and served on the firm's partnership committee. She recently retired after 25 years at the firm. Lisa's also an extraordinarily engaged alumna. She's a Syracuse University trustee and chairs the board's finance committee. She recently served as a member of the board's special committee on university climate, diversity, and inclusion. And she's also been chair of the Whitman Advisory Council since 2018. In addition to an amazing professional and service record, I also have to say that Lisa's one of the wisest, most insightful, and most grounded people that I know. And I feel extremely fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with her and to be able to benefit from her counsel and support in so many ways. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Fontenelli.
Oh, Jean, you're so kind. Thank you. Now I hope I live up to that. That was beautiful. I appreciate it. When we started talking about this Whitman Women in Business panel to take place during Women's History Month, I always get rubbed a little bit by the fact that women make history every day, right? That we don't need a month, right? That all of the women in the world who are making their way in the world of business are fighting the good fight and breaking taboos and finding ways to leave the place better than they found it. And I think what you'll hear from our panelists today, I would say, will be led by the quote, well-behaved women rarely make history. You have to be willing to break the norm. You have to be willing to step outside the box a bit. You have to have a tremendous amount of self-awareness as you make decisions about your path. And I think what you'll hear from our panelists today is how they built that understanding of the expectations around them, of their clients, of their shareholders, their managers, their colleagues, their employees, in order to exceed those expectations, right? To provide insight to what it really takes to achieve success in today's business world. And the role of risk assessment and the act of taking calculated risk is paramount to making positive change at both the macro and the micro levels. So we'll do a few things today. We'll do a quick speed round with the panelists. I will moderate Q&A for a while, and then at the end, we'll open up for a Q&A from the audience, which we would love to use the Q&A feature to input your questions, and I'll pull them from there and address them to the panelists. And so without further ado, let me introduce you to the wonderful women we get to spend some time with today. Orianna Fuentes graduated from Syracuse in 2012. We share her as a Whitman alum. She studied finance at Whitman. She's also a Maxwell alum. She got a degree in economics from Maxwell and a minor from the iSchool in enterprise technology. That's a foreshadowing. Upon graduation, she went to JP Morgan and spent 4 years there, working both in trading and in investment banking. It's a good way to get a sense of like how the world of capital works. And then went on to earn a master's in computer science from Columbia University. I think it was while she was at Columbia, she co-founded the company that she's currently the chief operating officer and co-founder called Emptor, which is a data automation company that builds software for background checks and digital diligence in Latin America. It's a 48-person team that has some pretty big clients like Uber and Digi. Orianna won the 2017 Whitman Young Alumnus of the Year Award, and she's really actively involved in Whitman. I've had the great pleasure of being with her in many different venues in support of Whitman and Whitman students. And she's not only a member of the Young Whitman Advisory Council, but also the Generation Orange Leadership Council. So welcome, Orianna. Ashley Keys, class of 2014. We don't share her with another school. She decided to do 2 majors at Whitman and is also a member of the Young Whitman Advisory Council. During her time as an undergraduate, she studied supply chain management and marketing and has conducted really interesting supply chain research at some very large companies. She's also a student athlete on the track and field team while she was at Syracuse. After graduation, Ashley went to General Motors as a global propulsion systems buyer. So she's not afraid of technical sales. And importantly, I think, and the reason I was so excited for Ashley to join us today is that she held these roles at General Motors and then moved to Apple as a global supply manager, and then went on as a program manager at Amazon and is now at Columbia University as a lab manager. But I'm really curious to hear about her decisions, what she learned along the way, and where she's planning to take that. So welcome, Ashley. We're very happy to have you here. Lizanne Kindler and I have gotten to know each other through her service on the Whitman Advisory Council. Lizanne is the Chief Executive Officer of Talbots, which, as many of you know, is an omni-channel retailer of women's apparel, shoes, and accessories. She returned to Talbots as president in August of 2012, when the company was purchased by Sycamore Partners and was promoted to CEO 9 months later. Her experience as CEO of a large retailer during the pandemic, I think, is going to be tremendously insightful for many of you who are listening. And under her leadership, the Talbots brand really returned to a healthy level of sales and profitability, opened new stores, developed new concepts, entered new product categories. And they've got 8,700 employees with more than 550 retail stores. Lizanne spent the first 15 years of her career in various leadership roles at Ann Taylor. She was instrumental in leading the foundational stages of their e-commerce business, as well as launching Ann Taylor Loft. She left Ann Taylor in 2008 for her first role at Talbots, and then went to Kohl's before returning to Talbots. Lizanne is a well-respected industry and community leader. She serves as an expert in residence for Babson College's Women Innovating Now lab. and there's an acronym there somewhere probably, which is really an accelerator for women entrepreneurs. She's a member of the Whitman Advisory Council, as I mentioned, but also a member of the Boston Federal Reserve Board of Directors. She earned her BA in economics from the Copenhagen Business School in her native Denmark. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to Lisanne as well. So let's start, ladies, with a little getting to know you speed round, if that's okay. Let's start with, where did you grow up? Lisanne, you first.
Well, in Copenhagen.
Okay. And when did you come to the US?
In, I want to say 91, I think.
Yeah. And Ashley, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Rochester Hills, Michigan, which is 45 minutes right outside of Detroit.
Oh, that's wonderful. And made your way to Syracuse and then sort of have been all over the country since then, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, welcome to my home state now, New York. And Orianna, how about you? Where did you grow up?
A mix of places. Pennsylvania, my dad was a Fulbright getting his PhD at Pitt, and then I spent 9 years in South America living in Peru. And I've been back in New York State since undergrad and in New York City since graduation. So
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So we've got great perspective. I always say, you know, I grew up in New Jersey. I went to college in upstate New York, and I moved to New York City. But I traveled the world for work, and so you know, you get perspective, right, when you see different cultures and from different angles in different places. You have a favorite book?
So I actually just started reading. My dad, who is Danish, grew up in Denmark, is deaf, and he just wrote a book on his life. So I just started reading that. So I'm very excited about that.
Oh, that's good. All right, we'll tell your dad that he's now your favorite author.
He's my favorite author.
Orianna, how about you?
I really fell in love with the book Lab Girl a couple of years ago. I was traveling and I was reading it while abroad. I think I was in Spain for work, and it's just beautifully written. And I actually went to Syracuse as a chemistry major, so science is just kind of really close to my heart. And it's amazing. She's just so accomplished from a like STEM perspective, but is actually an incredible author. It's a really beautiful story about her life. So
Yeah.
That's great.
I love that book too. And you never look at trees the same way again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
How about you, Ashley?
I actually just finished reading this book called The 4-Hour Workweek, which I really enjoyed because, especially during the times right now that we're going through with COVID-19, it really helped me take a step back and think more about the type of career and type of lifestyle I want to live. So 4-Hour Workweek is the top of my list right now.
Yeah, that's great. Tim Ferriss has a lot of good tips. They're much easier if you're an entrepreneur than if you work in a big corporation. How about a highlight of your time at SU or Whitman specifically, since we're on their dime?
I'm going to leave that to the two of you since I'm not an alum, but I'm sure my daughter.
Yeah, I was going to say you could probably share your daughter's perspective, Lisanne, but that's okay. Ashley, how about you?
Yeah, one of my biggest highlights for me was my last year going into a case competition. Professor Penfield invited a couple of students, there was 4 of us, to compete in a case competition, a supply chain in Detroit. And the company that was sponsoring was General Motors. And so that's actually how I got my first role out of college as a global propulsion systems buyer, was competing with 4 students and presenting our case to some GM executives. So definitely the top of the list for me.
Absolutely. Don't you love when you have a moment like that that leads, that makes the path open before you, right? It's
Yeah.
really great. How about you, Orianna?
I think the Remembrance Scholar ceremony, I think it was just really a way to feel connected with the campus and the history, and with a bunch of other students and some alumni who are from all over the university. And so that was definitely pretty special and unique.
Yeah. Anything come to mind, Lisanne?
Yeah, no, I would say that even though I didn't, I'm not an alum of Syracuse. I'd say that through Alexandra, my daughter, who's a senior at Whitman, and through my work with you and the advisory board, I have definitely come to understand the orange feeling of Syracuse and the amazing culture that the school offers, and why everyone's so passionate about the school. So I appreciate that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I personally thought that I was going to be a television executive. That's hence the Whitman Newhouse combo when I was in school. I ended up being a Wall Street executive, so I got the executive part right. But I, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be a psychologist, and I pivoted pretty early in terms of end market. But I'm curious from each of you, what you thought when you were entering college or when you were growing up, what you thought you were going to be when you grew up. And I'm still working on growing up myself. And where you landed, and how far from where you thought you were going to be are you, or is the path continuing to diverge as mine is? Sorry, that's kind of a messy question, right? What did you think you were going to be when you grow up, and how far from that are you?
I'll kick it off. So I knew pretty early on in my life that I wanted to be in retail. I had the pleasure of having a little taste of the world of fashion, and I was completely mesmerized. But I did have a second track. I wanted to be an actress, and I was sort of had a small role in a movie in Denmark, and then that was it. And then I never got any further. So I realized early on that was probably not a good track for me, even though I had a lot of fun. I stuck with my retail.
I think the world is better for that. And what did they say, Lizanne? When a door closes, a window opens somewhere, right? So
got it.
Orianna, how about you?
I think that changes every day. I went to school for chemistry. At some point I wanted to be a poet. Then I studied economics, finance. I was a banker and a trader. And maybe COO is sort of this great job where you have multiple jobs. And so I think I set out to never be bored, and never really had a good idea of what I wanted to do. And so maybe that's how I landed where I am now, I think.
Yeah, no. And I think, for me personally, I've always been motivated by learning. So as long as I can sink my teeth into some great new learning, I'm going to be happy. That combination of doing something that has positive impact, right, and keeping yourself challenged, I think is kind of intoxicating, right? So how about you, Ashley?
Yeah, for me, I always just envisioned myself traveling globally and conducting business. I always knew that I wanted something where I'd have the opportunity to travel, learn, and meet new people from across the globe, and really just see how conducting business globally is much different than just choosing to stay in one country, USA in particular, when I think about the automotive industry. But it's been a very interesting path for me as I've jumped from many different companies, experienced many different cultures. I kind of found myself getting obsessed more so with the organizations themselves and how people within the organizations interact with one another, and really question why some organizations are more successful than others. And so I did have the opportunity. I completed my master's degree in lean manufacturing and global leadership. And that was when I had the first opportunity to take an organizational behavior course. And so it opened up a brand new, basically Pandora's box for me, I like to say, because it showed me that there's a whole different side of business besides your P&L statements and cross-functional collaboration. There's a whole other piece to it with people and how people interact. And so that, especially with George Floyd and a lot of events that are currently taking place socially now, I was at a point in my career where I was in supply chain for about 7 years, and I took a step back and thought more about how I want to impact, really not even just one particular company that I'm a part of, but more so many organizations across the globe. And so during my time in undergrad, I had the opportunity to conduct research at Duke University in the PhD pipeline opportunity program. And so that opened a whole other realm for me too, and seeing that I can actually conduct research and be a business professor and use my research to help make change across many different organizations. And so that's kind of why I've made the switch from corporate to this lab manager position at Columbia University, to kind of help me tee off some research and really help me better understand what research looks like so that I can get ready to apply for PhD programs.
I think that's amazing. And I think, that's one of the things for the students who are in the audience, that the path that Ashley has traveled to really get an understanding of sort of what piques her interest and what problems she's interested in understanding and helping to solve in the world, probably takes her outside of working for an individual company into a role where she's going to be able to benefit many different organizations. I think, that's it's fascinating to me. And Ashley, we'll talk more about that, I hope, at some point, because I would really love to get your inside view on all of the different companies that you've worked at. Let's stay on the topic of path for a moment. Building on what you thought you were going to do and what you're actually doing. I'm looking for the aha moment, right? Was there a moment where there was a breakthrough where you knew that you weren't going to be the way you were before and that you were going to be doing something new? What is that professional breakthrough in your career or on your path that sort of helped you know that you were where you were supposed to be?
Oh, hard. That's a hard one. I don't know if there was a moment.
Yeah. I mean, there could not be, but there's, oftentimes there's a trial or a challenge or a difficulty that once you get on the other side of it, like your confidence is higher, or that, you're never going to be the same. It doesn't have to be a title change or a promotion or anything like that.
I'll take that one. I think for me, it happened after I left General Motors and I took the role at Apple as a global supply manager. And so in that role, it was a huge shock for me because it was not only culture shock, but also geographic shock of going to the Midwest and working for a company that's been around for 100 years, and then going to a company like Apple, who's very innovative, only around for about 40 or so years. And so the culture shock is what kind of was a light bulb that went off in my head. And so more specifically, the culture at GM, we have a meeting for an hour and everyone discusses a problem. But when I went to Apple, it was, we meet for 30 minutes. And before this meeting, everyone has already thought about what they're going to bring to the table. And so time was much more of the essence. And so for me, there was a breakthrough moment for really when I started to think ahead and learn how to think around the corner instead of just thinking about today. It's much more strategic. And when something happens, you already know that you have to prepare ahead of time. So it was a breakthrough moment for me to see that it's okay to look around the corner, and actually it should be expected to a certain extent. And then also for me, it helped me, the culture shock also taught me that it's okay to fail. And it's through your biggest failures where you come up with some of the biggest breakthrough items of technology really in history. And so don't be afraid to fail. And because I failed a lot in that role. But I think the biggest lesson learned looking back is that it's okay to fail. It's really about how you get up and come back.
Yeah, I so resonate with that. And, I always thought if we could recast failure as learning, right, that people would be much more willing, right, to test waters that they might not otherwise. So Lizanne, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, for me, it sort of goes back to when you were opening up, Lisa, you were talking about calculated risk taking. And for me, and now I'm going to date myself a little bit, right? But when I was at Ann Taylor, I spent 15 years of my career in one company. So that's a little bit unusual today. It's a long time. And through the years, I thought I was going to have a very traditional path. I was in the merchandising side of the organization, and I always knew that I wanted to lead. But the first time that I sort of broke with the path that I thought was a traditional trajectory, the company was launching Anteller.com. So yes, nobody was shopping online back then. So this is now I'm really dating myself. I was thinking, this sounds so cool. I really want to try something different, something new. And people were saying to me, you're crazy. You are on a path, you have a trajectory in your career. Why go do this thing that you don't know if this is going to work? And I learned, I think, two things. One is you brought in your own experience, your scope, your confidence, your learning when you do something that is unusual or untraditional. And I think I also learned that I should trust my own instincts and I should trust my own gut in terms, not let other people tell me what is good for my career, but trust my own instinct to go and learn and do something unusual. And I think that was the first time that I sort of realized a couple things. One, the path isn't going to be straight for me. And trust your own instinct and your own, know that you're in control of your own career and make your choices on your own. And that was, I think that definitely shaped sort of the rest of my career with those two filters.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And I'm wondering too, if that's a jumping off point to say, is there, as a result of that, do you have a process for assessing risk and for defining failure, as one of the consequences of taking risk? There may be reward, but the downside of taking risk is that, you might only learn something and have to roll again, right?
Yeah. And, one of the things that I've always said to myself is, if I try something different, try something new, I can always undo it and untry it and go back. So I think when you think that you're making a decision and it feels like it's forever, yeah, and you can't change it, then it's a much bigger risk, right? But when you take a risk and you try something different and you know that if it doesn't work out, then you will find a different way to get back. And I think that's where I start to weigh, the risk component and just understanding that there is a path. There's always a different path you can take if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one of the things I learned from Orianna, I always love listening to her talk about her business because, the nimbleness with which you have approached your business and sort of the virtual connectivity of your business, I think, is a model for what a 21st century business is. And so I'm curious how you think about risk assessment in that regard, how you think about failure in that regard, because it seems to me like, because you're always learning, like you kind of like realize it, assess it, move on, get to the next thing. And I'm curious if that's, similar to how you think.
That's a really good question. I think very early on, I realized that career was just an accumulation of experience and learning. And so I did have multiple banking jobs. I didn't overperform at them by any means, which probably was a good indicator that I wasn't meant to be in banking for a long term. But I did accumulate kind of like knowledge and experience that I use now. And so I think realizing that risk isn't just, it's kind of multifunctional, right? Where you're looking at what will you learn or not learn, who will you work with, and kind of all those ratios are very personal, like compensation, if you change cities or countries. And so I think it's not just one facet. I think specifically to enter, we just have to, I think a startup is definitely for the love of the art than anything else. And so sometimes there's this fear that we might fail or do something wrong, but nobody told us to go build something out of nothing. We could have all just had normal jobs and a nice structure. And so realizing that if you fail, it's great, it's more knowledge. And so but that's only possible in a culture that tolerates that really well. And so for us, building a place where we're allowed to tinker a lot, and I think that comes from my co-founder as well. We're very experimental, even in not just the technology, but also how we build talent. We're actually looking at launching a talent and culture lab because we are kind of HR technology, but we've spent 4 or 5 years researching and innovating in remote work, in multinational talent development. And so just to give you guys a sense of the diversity we've accomplished with that, is, so we have people in over 10 countries. We're 40% female, which is rare for a startup, and we're 19% LGBTQ plus. And so that's amazing for a completely small new startup in technology. And that's been because we've created this environment where people can come and try ideas and will be heard. And so risk tolerance is pretty wide, but it's really just people are brought in and told to be accountable and responsible, but also to tinker, and they'll be allowed to do that.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me. And I, you make me think about this every time I get a chance to talk to you, Orianna, because, I want to talk about the subject of adaptation, right? Because what you've done, because you've built it from the ground up, is really hard to do in something that has founding fathers, right? that founded the institution 150 years ago or 100 years ago, right? The institutions are wired to be for the benefit of the people who, look like the founding fathers. And so I always wonder, like, how hard you have to pull on the system in order to get it to change versus just having these green shoots of people who decide they're going to do it differently in order to move that wheel. So anyway, sorry, that's just my musing. But it does raise the question about adaptation and like where you've adapted to your environment or where your environment's adapted to you, right? And we talk about women's leadership in business in particular, which still tends to be predominantly male, especially in the corporate echelon. I think there's a question in my mind about how you've adapted. You learn the rules of a place, right? You learn how to get along at something. You understand what's expected of you, and then how to exceed those expectations, as I mentioned earlier. But in some ways, in my experience, because especially when I was starting out, I was often the only woman at the table. The environment also had to adapt to me. And so I'm curious if that resonates with any of you, and what your experience has been there, and how you feel like over the course of your time in both corporate and out of corporate environments, that's morphed for you. Lizanne, is there something that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I think, when I think about the environment, first of all, I 100% agree. We've come a long way, but in the corporate world, I think Fortune 500, like, record number of women, which is about 8%. So, okay. So we got a ways to go. I would say that I've experienced a lot of change. I've been very fortunate in the world of specialty retail. There's actually quite a lot of women that lead companies. There's a lot of women executives. I've had a lot of women mentors that have been role models and great executives. But I think, for me, it's about being true to yourself and being true to who you are, right? Like, you could easily fall into, you want to come across a certain way if you're sitting across from a group of male leaders, which, I've been in a bunch of board meetings, investment review meetings, work for portfolio companies with quite a lot of men. And I think I've never wanted to be anyone other than me. And I feel like that's been the key for me to come across with confidence, know who I am, know what I know what I'm good at, know what I bring to the table, but also know that I don't have all the answers. And I'm quite comfortable with that. So I do feel like I've not adapted to an environment that in many cases have been more male dominated, but I've had the confidence to go in and just be true to who I am and know what I bring to the table. And I feel like that's served me well. I do know of a lot of women that have been in situations where they felt as a leader that they had to think about coming across a little bit differently and less authentically because there was an expectation across the table. And I don't know that that's served them well over time. I feel like for me, it's about staying true to who you are and what you bring. So
I think, yeah,
but it's hard.
Yeah, and I think too that something that Ashley said about her time at Apple is a key to that, right? You have a seat at the table and you want to have a voice, but when you're expected to come prepared and contribute, when everyone's expected to contribute, right? It doesn't become about the talking head at the top of the table, right? Right.
Yeah, no, and I would also say I've been in an environment where it was a bit more traditional. And it was definitely more male dominated. And I actually made the choice to leave the environment because it wasn't me. I wasn't authentically me in that environment. And that's been the key part for me.
Yeah. That was my mantra my whole time on Wall Street, that if I thought it really was changing me as a person, that I wasn't going to stay there. But I also found that the balance of empathy and strength that I think is hallmark of my leadership was a differentiator in a very positive way. So, right. Orianna, was there something that you wanted to add there?
I guess something that was just mentioned made me think of reading about how the problem with some of these workplaces isn't just necessarily the imbalance in gender, but it's also certain coded behaviors that aren't necessarily just bad for women, but they're also bad for quite a few men. Yeah. And so I think that really changed my thinking of, it's not just the men, it's also the culture that is framed around that. And I think I guess I was listening to a talk by Cindy Gallup recently. So if anybody's ever seen her speak, you should. It's incredible. It's just all this energy kind of towards you. But one of the things that she says is, you have to invent the future. You can't wait for it to change. And so when we set out to do Enter, and maybe this is sort of speaking to adapting to or making the world adapt, I just set out to create a better place to work, because all my friends, especially in New York, and I came from finance, like hate their jobs. And why would you want to hate, what you do 16 hours a day for years. And so I think when I left, something that I thought about a lot was, if somebody stays at a small company that could fail, that is maybe won't have that brand recognition, it has to be somewhere where people want to be and either like the founders, like each other, like the product. And so that was very important from the very beginning. And it's really created a unique experience, particularly in LATAM, which is incredibly chauvinistic, and particularly in tech, and created just a very different place to work, where people have stayed bizarrely long for a small startup, especially that's very millennial. So I think it's been, for us, we have the opportunity, given it's a small place, to just create something completely new and experiment and get that feedback, and continuing making just a place to work that looks very different to at least everything that I had been exposed to before.
Yeah. And Ashley, I imagine that you have some thoughts on how organizations behave in this context.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest experiences for me when my environment had to adapt to me was when I decided in my career to leave the corporate environment and go to the manufacturing world. And so I left my role as a buyer and I went to the manufacturing facility where we were making the autonomous vehicle. And so in that role, I think I was 24, 25, and I was put as a supervisor to basically lead a team of 36 people in the body shop. And so they were union employees, and a lot of them had never had someone they had to report to who was, 1, African-American, 2, a woman, and 3 younger than them. And so very often in that role, I was tested. And so it took about a month for me to really get to a point where, as a leader, I knew that although I didn't look like a lot of anyone who I managed, I wanted to break down that barrier. And so I made it my business to meet with everyone one-on-one individually, and let them know, kind of get to know me, I get to know them, and, just kind of let them know that, I'm not so scary, and that I was letting them know that I was a servant leader. That's more so of my leadership type is, I try to meet with people, let them know that I respect the work that they're doing, and whatever I can do to remove any obstacles, that's my role. And so I found it very I found it much easier after I had those conversations with my employees, for them to come to me with any issues, and for me to really lean on them for any help that I needed. And one of the things I think is huge with adapting to workplace cultures and people do look different from you is really letting everyone know, or helping the team realize, that we're all alike much more than we are different. And so that was probably the biggest lesson learned, and probably the biggest shock for me throughout my career.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you've just said, but I think the one-on-one and creating a personal connection to each of the employees is such a valuable management tool, and one that I don't think is used often enough, because there isn't time, or because somebody's looking at numbers and you think you're managing to numbers instead of managing human relationships, right? And I think what you did there had to be key to your success. And at the same time, I think what having each of your employees see you as a person does is it lowers the opportunity for them to create their own narrative about you, right? And I think I'm wondering if you could each talk a little bit about what the narrative is that you put out as an executive, as a leader of a business and people. Like, who are you to the people who work for you? And what kind of opportunity does that create?
That's a really great question. I think in my case, it's been to the people who directly report to me, which are the most senior people at our organization. It's been a mixture of coach and mentor and friend and confidant. And so I think what's different about us is that people do bring their whole selves. And so, especially with last year, where there's people with ill parents or difficult things in quarantines. And so being able to not worry that you can't, we have to hide that at work. And so having that close relationship helps a lot. And I think it trickles down in the rest of the organization, where everybody also brings that kind of very genuine also vulnerability and care a lot about their people and coach them. And so that's been, I think, a lot of what I've done. And then just very kind of open and available. I don't do many skip levels, but I do a few. And so there's very junior people who get to talk to me every couple of weeks, and I know them well and they know me well. And so that really changes how people feel, and people feel much more connected to the company, which is also probably one of the reasons they've stayed for so long.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Lizanne, do you have thoughts there?
Yeah, as you were talking, it's interesting. I was thinking back. I had a moment where I resigned, and the CEO of the company said to me, we're going to keep this quiet for a little bit because, I have to come up with this transition plan. And she said, you're going to be a big miss in the organization. You're such an executive of the people. And I didn't know if she meant it as a compliment or if she meant it as someone who, and I processed it later on in my career. And I realized that one of the things that I love the most is the people I work with. One of the things that make me most proud is people I work with. When I see people happy, succeed, fulfilled, and contributing and being effective, it's what makes me excited. And when I conversely see organizations or people or teams that aren't excited, that aren't passionate, that are not engaged, I want to solve to it. So I think this sort of this passion and love for working with people, when you're in a people industry, that is a big part of being a leader, and being approachable and being a good listener are key traits that I think people enjoy. It's what I enjoy the most. I always say business is business. You go anywhere, business is running a business, but really what makes the difference, the people you work with and the teams that you work with, that's what makes it fun and exciting and innovative, and rewarding. So this executive of the people kind of stuck with me for a couple of years. And I was like, was that a compliment or I don't know. And then I made it a compliment. I said, yes, I am, because I love working with people. And I think it's really important. The leader of an organization, I think it's important to set your goals. I think it's important to have focus and be driven, et cetera, et cetera. But truly the magic happens when you have amazing teams come together and things are working well, and the culture is rich and fun and engaging. So I think that's the best part of the job.
Absolutely. And the motivation that comes from that produces great results. Like, this isn't just about let's have a happy workplace. This is about when people are happy doing what they're doing and they enjoy being with the people they work with, they're more productive and they're, they are more innovative and they're more collaborative, and all good things come from that. Right. Yeah. So I don't know, Ashley, was there anything else you want? You sort of led us into that. So I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think for me, for me as a leader, as a person, I'm very yes and I like to question why a lot. And so I think as a leader, I think it's important to make sure that you empower the people around you. And when you tell people no, but, and when they hear no more often, they're less likely to bring good ideas to you. And so I've made a huge effort to become that yes and person, whatever aspect I have the opportunity to do so. And throughout my career, that mentality has given me a lot of visibility throughout the organizations that I've been at, because what happened is executives will throw challenges or leadership will throw challenges my way because they know that I'm the yes and person. And so I'm able to take that yes and put a plan together and come back with something and kind of march to the drum, assemble a team cross-functionally and things like that. So for me, I think being the yes and person and questioning why, and not taking we've always done it this way approach to anything. I think for me, being bold has definitely kind of led my path, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing. I want to ask one more question, then I'm going to open it to the audience for questions. So if you have questions and you want to put them in the Q&A, you can start to do that now. I think I spent 30 years on Wall Street. I think for at least 20 of those 30 years, my firm had, a diversity professional, and lots of programs and lots of, approaches to recruitment and accountability and to creating a more diverse and inclusive working environment. And nothing really stuck. Everybody's still working really hard at it, but I'm curious for your thoughts on what really needs to change for business specifically to achieve greater gender and racial. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say both equality and equity, because they're different, right? Equality is equality of opportunity, like everybody can apply, everybody's going to be considered, but equity is about the outcomes, right? And I think we've probably done a much better job at equality just in terms of casting the net more widely, but we haven't really done a very good job with equity because the outcome hasn't actually produced a much more diverse and inclusive environment in a lot of the business world. So share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I think that it's very crucial for organizations to be careful not to only chase numbers when we talk about equity. I think that any organization, if they so chose, they could recruit a ton of different minorities and people from different backgrounds. But I think that it's important that we not only look at numbers, but we also look at how do we retain the talent that we currently have and how do we develop it? And then I think that equity should also be on top of the agenda. It's not enough to just recruit and chase a number. You have to make sure that people feel like they're a part of the organization and also make sure that they're given the exact same equal opportunities. And I think that it's important for organizations to look at their structure systemically to see what their hiring processes look like, and look if minorities or even women are at the majority, at the bottom of the pyramid within your organization. I think you have to look at your middle managers and also your executives. And I think once you look into the data and put together a plan, like I said, I really want to stress that it should not be a numbers game. It's more so how organizations are reaching those numbers and making sure team members feel comfortable in the workplace.
Yeah, and that they have a platform to succeed.
Yes.
This has to be about the performance and the opportunity to perform well and to be heard. Lizanne, do you have thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, this has been obviously over this past year in particular, a tremendous topic, discussion, debate, initiatives across, not just the organizations that I'm involved with, but anyone that I'm talking to in the industry. And I think, first of all, I'm grateful that it has become a really top of mind topic. I'm not grateful for how, but for the fact that it's even a bigger topic today than it was a year ago. And I think we all have to authentically put our energy into how to make the changes. And I think, it's just like you said, Ashley, it's not about a number. It's about really walking the walk. It's about being thoughtful about it every single day. It's about supporting it in ways I think that we've not done before. Like Talbot's, actually, interestingly enough, is from a gender perspective, we're 92% women. So it's like all women. But as you make your way through your career, when you get to the executive level, we're more like 60-40, right? Wow. Which is interesting. And I've thought a lot about that, being that we're predominantly a women's company. And I find that we have to be thoughtful about how we support the trajectory all the way through, right? Because as you grow in your career, you're faced as a person with different challenges. And how do we open up to support and be flexible and provide the tools and the means to support any one person in our company, be it, gender, race, ethnicity, whatever it is. How do you support that all the way through? So I wholeheartedly agree with you that this isn't just about a number. It's about being thoughtful about how you organize the organization to support not just incoming candidates, but associates all the way through the trajectory of your career. It's important.
Orianna?
I guess
really critical.
Yeah. I guess the first thing is just all of leadership really committed to it. It can't just be one head of D&I, which happens a lot of big companies. They install typically a Black woman or a Latina woman to be head of D&I, and then that person is sort of the kind of like fall down if that effort fails. And I think that's a really big problem at a lot of big companies who are just trying to put a Band-Aid on the problem. And so you need everybody incredibly committed to it, and all kind of C-levels. I think the other component is creating a really inclusive culture. So there can be diversity, but if there's, a segregated, uninclusive culture, it's just not going to work. People are going to leave. And I think the other thing is just researching tons of tactical things. Like one of the things I found out a couple of years ago, we've started implementing, is that even your job description can be coded in a way that will be unappealing to certain groups of people. And back to my comment about men in male environments finding them toxic, there's this company called Textio that will do this, but there's also a free software called Gender Decoder that will do this. And so if you can compare two startup sort of job descriptions, and one of them can say sort of like competitive, aggressive, fast-paced environment, and all these things, and the other one can say creative, innovative, like environments. And they might be describing a very similar place, which is a chaotic startup, but they're very clearly appealing to different crowds. And I actually gave this example to my analyst, who's a man, and he was like, yeah, I wouldn't want to work at the aggressive competitive environment, so I work here. And so things like that, structured interviews, there's so many things that have research behind them, and making sure to kind of iterate upon that and see what the impact is on people, not just at the hiring level, right? There's all these other things also at the retention level and the growth level as well. And so I think it takes a lot of effort, and I think it takes a really committed team to do that.
Yeah, and for me, it boils down to something that I think is critical to all management and leadership, which is for each person who works with you to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, right? And when you get to that point, you have a much better opportunity for developing talent regardless, and hopefully a great appreciation for recognizing that good ideas come in a lot of different packages, right? We have a few questions from the audience, if I can shift gears. The first is from Jenny May. This is our pandemic question, right? From working remotely, what positive impacts do you see the pandemic having on women in the workplace? And what practices will you continue personally in your professional role after we're back to whatever the new normal is?
Well, I would say that, first of all, I think that the work from home, I think it's bifurcating in a way. It's been really good, I think, for a lot of the women that work for, that I deal with, in the sense that they've been able to take good care of their children. And we know that we've been through a massive problem in terms of childcare. So I think that's actually been quite nice. But I do think that the boundaries between personal and professional has really gotten blurred. So I've also witnessed a lot of women being even more stressed out, even more stretched thin, and constantly feeling that they're on. So in my mind, I think this idea that there's a flexible solution is probably where we're going to land, and that work from home from a women's support perspective has been good in certain ways. But I think the flexibility to have some sort of separation between office and home is going to be beneficial. I think we've been infinitely more effective and efficient in certain ways, but maybe some misses on the cultural part in the fact that we're not all together. So I would say mixed, but certainly a lot of learnings. And I think that the workplace will be a better place post-pandemic once we land the right approach, the right balance.
Yeah. Orianna or Ashley, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that with the pandemic, a lot of companies have shown their true colors. And I think a lot of people are starting to demand more things of their companies. And I really hope that changes workplaces. I think with women in particular, it's been a little bit what Lizanne was saying, it's like a double-edged sword. There's a lot of women who have had most of the burden of childcare while working without having schools open and daycares open. And that's been extremely negative, with tons of women leaving the workforce, which I hope that after the pandemic ends, there's a bounce back effect. Basically what Lizanne was saying, which is that flexibility is incredibly beneficial for people who have to balance other things, and not just childcare, like people who are caretakers for other family members or have other things at home. Life is complicated, I think, is what we've all learned last year, and having companies support that. I think one of the other things is just equating like childcare in general. So making paternity and maternity leave equal, I think is something that's really important, because that is from the get-go, like creates an unbalance when you have a dad who's going back to work after 2 weeks, and then you have like maybe that mother doesn't work at your company, but that's creating kind of a structural issue at other companies that holds women back kind of structurally throughout the whole workplace. And so I think things like that, and other kind of company benefits that really support different phases of life are going to be really important. And I hope they're demanded for in the next few years.
Right. Ashley,
Yeah.
do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add really quickly. I think one of the major benefits of the pandemic is that it's allowed everyone to kind of take a step back and rethink about what is working in their life and what's not. And so I think as far as childcare and changes in the workplace goes, I think now is the perfect time that if you see that a company culture isn't working for you, if you see that a certain situation related to childcare or whatever else in your life isn't going to work, use this time now to replan and rethink your situation. Because I've been getting emails that some offices may be going back in September. And so I think now is the time to take advantage of the times.
So here's a question from Tiffany Lawson. She starts by saying some of the words used to define who you are to the people who work for you really stood out: friend, confidant, coach, mentor, executive, the people. You don't really hear those often in the corporate world. So the question is, how did you foster those relationships? But I think the question I'd really like you to answer is the next one she asks, which is, where do you begin to implement this sort of change in an organization where you're not yet a decision maker, right? So, you're still coming up in your career. What behaviors do you adopt, right, in order to be somebody who moves along a trajectory to being the kind of leader and manager that you guys have described?
I think the easiest way to do that is to really learn your organization and look for the problems and take those problems to your leadership. Because when you, let me rephrase, take those problems, think of a solution beforehand and take it to your leaders. And I think that once you share information within because they don't always know, and when I say that, I mean executives don't always know what problems the working level are really dealing with. And so if you take the effort to find a problem, talk to people about it, and then take that to a leader, then you found a reason to talk to them and you found a way to help them improve their organization. So that would probably be my biggest tip.
Yeah, that's very good advice. I always used to tell people who worked with me, you're allowed to come in and complain once. And the next time you come, but talking about the same thing, you better come with a solution.
And I would also say that I feel like it's through my career, I found that similar to what Ashley's saying, that, you can mobilize teams of people around you and get everyone on board. And then you will see senior management will make changes and they will listen. If you're a group of folks, you have ideas, you have suggestions, you have solutions. And I think that, if you're seeing something as an individual in the organization, I think you can create impact. You can positively impact culture and structure yourself as an individual associate in a smaller or a bigger company. I've seen it both ways.
Yeah, I know we're coming up on time. Orianna, did you want to add something?
No, I was just gonna say, just ask for more from your teams and your people. Like if they want to retain you, people want to retain talent, and so there has to be ask for those ways.
Absolutely. What's your here? This is from Christina Campisi. What is your advice on going from being a good manager to a great leader?
I think being very human, being very kind of sort of authentic makes a big difference, because people can trust you. I think you can be a good manager. I think being a good manager is a good manager and a good leader are very related, honestly. I think there's a lot of bad managers out there who just have those titles. But I think being very accessible and also being able to balance kind of vulnerability with being authentic, I think makes a really big difference for people. Because people trust you with their jobs and their careers too, even if they're working for you. So.
Yeah, I always thought about the difference of being between management and leadership, which is management is going to help you get stuff done, right? And show you the way to get stuff done. And leadership is going to tell you what direction you're going in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Lisa. I think that defining, I think as I've grown in the role of being a leader, I think defining a path and defining it in such a way that groups of associates and teams will follow and can imagine the vision for what it is that you're trying to define and how to come along on the path. And I agree. I think that the qualities, the authenticity, the communication skills, the listening skills, and also I'd say, there is an aspect of also knowing who you are and being humble and understanding that alone you can't do anything, right? It takes a team of people, and it takes different types of expertise and different types of talents to achieve great results. And I think as a leader, it's part of your role is to gather the best talent and get the best out of the talent. And I think that's a key trait as well.
Yeah, I know we're running a few minutes over, but I can't not ask this next question from Joanne Lang, which is, what was your biggest career challenge and how did you handle or manage it?
COVID-19, I guess, was probably definitely up there. I think being extremely transparent was the most important aspect. When we saw, we got hit for a couple of months and recovered, but when we saw, I kept watching the numbers and kept, I had a plan and I spoke to my group heads. And then the weekend that I felt that things were not looking good, we had an all hands at Monday and we told everybody what things were looking and measures we were taking and how this was going to impact everybody. And everybody took a salary cut. We all did. And And that was to preserve the whole team. We didn't fire anybody, let anybody go. And so we were extremely transparent. We showed the revenue numbers, we showed our projections, we explained what was going on, and we explained our approach and then updated people as often as possible. That made a really big difference.
Yeah, you made them believe you were all in it together also by doing that. So, yeah. What a great commitment to your people. Lizanne?
Yeah, I'd say I agree. Pandemic's been the biggest career challenge, without a doubt. And I also just told our board recently that it's also been my proudest year, because I've never seen a team come together like I've seen here. And the amount of accomplishments that are not evident in the financial results are the accomplishments that I'm the most proud of in my career, though it's been the most challenging and the hardest. I'd say on a personal level, my first time that I was at Talbot's, I was so excited about the brand, so excited about the business and the team. But I realized that the leadership team that I was working with, we were completely misaligned. And I'd say that the biggest struggle for me was coming to the realization that I alone couldn't carve the path that I saw. I needed to have the executive team aligned with me, and I couldn't get that. So I needed to make the change and lead the organization. And that was a really, really difficult decision, because there was so much I loved about my job, but I also realized that unless you have a very aligned team, it's difficult to achieve what you need to achieve in business.
Ashley?
Yeah, I think so. COVID-19 has been very tough for me as well. But I think the biggest challenge has been overcoming imposter syndrome. And for me, it's because a lot of my career, I've been in rooms where again, I was the only person who looked like me in the room. And so I constantly would, look left, look right. And it's just like, why am I here? Do I belong in here? Am I doing good enough, really? And I think that there got a point to my career, and I guess this could be seen as another breakthrough, but I got to a point in my career where I started making more decisions and I got more into my management roles. And I just started to see that I was making the right decisions. And so I think really getting over the hump of imposter syndrome, it really took me about 4 to 5 years in my career to really feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I think, time and performance are two things that hopefully, if you're paying attention, start to give you the confidence that you've got this, right? Ladies, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could spend hours and hours talking to you, and I hope someday we get to do that in person. On behalf of the Whitman team, I thank you all. On behalf of the Syracuse University team, I thank you all. And I'm especially grateful that you're forever orange.